Okay, I think I'm live now. Sorry, the YouTube. Okay, let me just post this again. Looks like we are. All right. Can you guys hear me? Just say something in the chat because I'm not 100% sure this is working. It's being pretty derpy. All right, awesome. Okay, so I see 4 people in the chat. Looks like Theo, Liz, Ronnie. Hi, Ronnie. I don't know why my video is like lagging behind what I'm actually saying, but all right. Never mind. I will just make sure that link is visible. All right. So what I was going to do today, basically, was just kind of do the usual intro and talk a bit about what I do for those few people here who don't know my work. And as usual, like I tend to give topical talks when I broadcast. I like to sort of talk about the research and the background that goes into my works. And that's partly just because not a lot of people know very much about the Russian mafia, and there's a lot of misinformation about organized criminal activity in general. And it's kind of leaks into fiction. And I don't know, like I come from a research background and a scientific writing background, so I'm kind of a stickler for accurate information when it comes to writing and research and stuff. So so the first thing I will do, and I'll do this in text as well while there's not too many people on the feed. First thing to do is to introduce my work. Basically, right. Hey, gangsters. Russian. I basically write gay Russian gangster urban fantasy with a short, grumpy Ukrainian protagonist, his cat, and his very codependent best friend. I think that's a fairly accurate summary of what my entire series is about. At this stage, it is 80% romance, as every good Mafia story really should be. Where the hell is my percent key? It was 80% romance and about 20% daddy issues with magic and guns. I think that's a fairly succinct summary of what I actually do with my work. And I will post some fancy fucking covers. Yes, I swear, if you don't like swearing and you happen to not know me, you may not want to listen to me today because there will be a lot of that. All right, so I have posted my first post on Facebook, which is awesome. So yeah, I write, as I just said, Russian gangster, or more accurately, Eastern European gangster, urban fantasy, set in primarily in the New York Eastern European crime underworld, but also like veering off into like every other underworld that kind of exists in this sort of fictionalized modern day universe. I also happen to write in a paracosm, which is essentially like a world with its own mythos and its own like meta mythos. So it's got like texts and organizations and features within that mythos that kind of build it up in a sort of world building setting. Good examples of paracosms include Terry Pratchett's Discworld. That would be counted as a paracosm. Also, even like the Dungeons and Dragons setting, you know how people will write books and they'll actually write, you know, religions and stuff into that it sort of goes beyond world building and more into like creating a kind of almost artificial reality type setting with its own meta texts. And the particular paracosm I write in is an original paracosm developed primarily by my wife and assisted by me. She started building this particular setting about 30 years ago, and it's called the Dermal Highway. And if I will post a link to the Dermal Highway wiki, because a lot of people are kind of interested in the background that goes into the magic and the creatures that feature in Bloodhound and my other books. I currently have 3 books in this series published. I have Bloodhound, which is the first book. I have Stained Glass, which is the second book, and Burn Artist, which I just put out. And Burn Artist is a prequel to Book 1. It's set 5 years before Book 1, and it deals with Alexei's kind of growing awareness that he's really not a very good fit for the Russian Mafia, that there's something not quite right about his presence and his participation in this culture. And so really, what I was going to talk about today, my last talk was on Russian swearing and Eastern European swearing, because like Ukraine and Russia are very distinct. They have a lot of interrelationship. They share similar language, but they are very distinct countries, and they have very distinct cultures. So Alexei is Ukrainian. He's a little bit of a Ukrainian nationalist as well. It's kind of hinted throughout the books that he has pretty strong feelings about being Ukrainian as opposed to being called Russian. So last thing was about Ukrainian and Russian swearing, most of which involves the word "chi," which basically means dick. It's a lot ruder in Eastern European languages than it is in English. It's kind of equivalent to like the C word. It's pretty full on. People have been fired for using it in public. Like government officials have occasionally used "chi" in the course of their speeches or something, and they've gotten fired for it. But today what I wanted to talk about was the Russian criminal tattoos that are so often featured in organized crime novels, and especially romance. Like there's this huge fucking like fetishization of Russian mafia tattoos. And one of the worst trends I have seen lately, like in the real world, is people using gang tattoos and Russian mafia tattoos, and not just like Russian tattoos, but also like, you know, Latino gang tattoos and Hell's Angels tattoos and stuff. Like they're actually like getting those just because they want to. Like these hipster guys are like getting fucking Hell's Angels stuff on them. And it's like, you realize like if you're ever in jail, like if you get pulled up for weed or if you get pulled up for a traffic infraction or something, and you end up in a cell with a bunch of Hell's Angels, they're going to hold you down and they're going to cut that tattoo off your body. Like they are going to get shanks and they're going to cut that shit off you. Like the tattoos are a very serious deal in a lot of different criminal and gang organizations. The history of Russian tattooing, it goes back all the way back to the 1800s. It's a really old tradition in sort of organized crime in Eastern Europe. And it originally came about during the Tsarist period, but before the Russian Revolution, way back when they were ruled by, you know, the kings and they had like a royal family and stuff. Convicts were tattooed with 3 letters on the face, which basically depicted that they were going to be used as like forced labor. And the 3 letters were KAT, cat. So cat, like that cat glyph that was put on their faces was the start of the tradition in Eastern Europe of branding criminals on the face with tattoos. And to this day, the word cat, K-A-T, in Russian can be used to denote a criminal. It's still in use. It's a bit old-fashioned these days, but you know, people do still use that, and it's sort of used like ruffian. You know, it's kind of one of those sort of words. And so from there, as time went along, and of course the Russian Revolution happened, and when the Russian Revolution happened, there were a lot of political criminals. There were a lot of people who whose crimes basically extended to, you said a bad thing about the government, or you stole a loaf of bread or a cabbage, and now you're going to a labor camp for 10 years. So in the labor camps, a lot of these people who were not like hardcore criminals, they were just desperate people, or they were political dissidents. they got together and they formed like really strong societies within the prison camps. And the prison camps, you may have heard them, they're called Gulag. Gulag is not really a plural, it's an acronym. I can't remember what the initials stand for, but it's essentially like a forced labor camp slash prison slash hellhole. It was basically to torture people for several years at a time, and so yeah, they developed a really intricate system of languages and like visual communication. Um, which included both the kinds of crimes they committed. So the guys who were in there for murder or who were in there for political dissidents, they generally wore some pretty hardcore looking tattoos. Like they had these things called grins, and grins were usually like animals, like they're big tattoos and they're really fierce looking tattoos. So like tigers, lions, devils, things like that. And they'd wear those to basically show that, I'm a hardcore motherfucker. I told Lennon to go and shove it, and now I'm in prison. So like there's a good example of a grin. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, see that, David? Both of those actually. You can see like the cat thing. The cat thing still applies in a lot of those tattoos, and the cat is used as a symbol of thievery and of criminals in these tattoos. And this is a really good book, by the way, if you're really ever interested in it. Oh, my feed's backwards, but this is one of 3 books that was done that basically records the history and has a lot of examples of the different kinds of tattoos that were used in those prison camps and that have evolved through the course of like going on 150 years now of tradition. Now, the thing that some of you may have noticed if you've read Bloodhound is that Alexei doesn't have any tattoos. The reason Alexei doesn't have any tattoos is because, firstly, Alexei has never been to prison. He goes to prison in book 3, which I guess is a bit about a spoiler. Hang on, I'm just going to quickly update something on Facebook before I continue. I'm just telling everyone what I'm talking about. Otherwise, people will have no idea why they should be listening to me blather on. And I'll post a few links on Facebook as well, because I've got some really good example pictures, including a couple of tattoo designs I used for my latest piece of art, which was something I posted on NaNoWriMo. Okay, I think I can post these to the YouTube chat too, actually. No, I can't. Well, never mind. Hopefully you guys have got the Facebook event open as well, but there's a link to the post I just made. So yeah, so basically Alexei doesn't have any tattoos, and the reason he doesn't have any, he hasn't been to prison. He also was born in the United States, and that's a really huge cultural gap between him and his elders. In like the Russian mafia is very hierarchical, and a big part of what these tattoos were designed to do was to establish hierarchy. So like we got these 2 guys here. I'll post this up. Look at these 2 charming, very wholesome looking individuals. See this guy here, see these stars he's got on his shoulders? That ranks him as being a captain in a brotherhood, a bratye, or a bratva, sometimes they're called. And those are like, tattoos of very high rank. So essentially what you've got here is you've got this entire like language, his entire criminal history, and a lot of his beliefs and a lot of his problems are actually written into these tattoos. So like, I don't know if you can see very well, but see that spider web tattoo up there? The spider web tattoo with the spider crawling up towards the neck, and his is crawling up towards his head as opposed to down. That's basically code for I'm a criminal and I'm going to stay a criminal, and I want to be a criminal and I'm going to be a criminal forever. He's also got epaulets, so they have like military style, like those fringed epaulets that they have on jackets. They tattoo those on again for rank. Knives tend to indicate that you've killed someone. Spiders' webs, like on the arms or lower down on the body, designate a drug addict or someone that wants to pursue drugs. People, they have other ones. They have like They use a lot of religious iconography. They often use it in a kind of sarcastic way. The religious iconography that most criminals get is not very, not very devout. They use it as to kind of hide messages, because guards were less likely to search, to read anything into religious tattoos. So they would get pictures of like churches, and the number of towers on the churches would indicate the length of their sentence or how many terms they've served. They get crosses, and they get all sorts of things like that to kind of indicate rank and status. And one of the other ones that was really common were pictures of Lenin or Stalin, like the communist leaders. They would get those pictures like over their hearts, or they would get them like over their vulnerable core parts. And they would do that because it was illegal for the guards to shoot an image or destroy an image of Lenin or Stalin. So they wouldn't actually, they did it to try and stop them from shooting them. But of course, what would happen was that instead of shooting them in the chest, they turn them around and shoot them in the back of the head. So you often see people from that era that had like Lenin tattoos on the back of their head. Of course, I guess the most infamous ones are the ring tattoos that they do kind of across here. And those were very much part of Gulag life. They're not so common these days. They're kind of one of the most fetishized like imagery, like tattoo images that are used for the Russian mob. But it's actually very rare to find someone these days who isn't like over 50 that has ring tattoos. And they were to show visible status. So people who were sworn thieves, who didn't ever want to become anything else except a criminal, they would get them tattooed on their hands, because no matter what you're wearing, you can be in like full sleeves, they're visible to the naked eye. So they would they would basically put them on their hands to say, I don't give a shit anymore. It's like how these days Mexican cartel gang people will tattoo their heads and their faces for the same reason, to show that they don't care and that they're going to be a criminal for life. So, I mean, that's kind of your Cliff's Notes version of what these are. And I've posted a few reference images. So I also do art as well as writing. I will post the photo of one of the characters from my books. Update everyone. Yes, by the way, women did get tattoos. They're not just a guy-only thing. There are women historically in, I guess you could say, the Russian Mafia, and I use the term very loosely because it's not actually a very good descriptor of what they are. And that's one thing that's noted in Burn Artist, which is the latest book that I put out. Alexei, at one point, because it's a prequel and because I'm giving it away for free a lot of the time, there's some, like, I guess, background information that isn't included in the other books. And one of the things that Alexei notes is that, the term Russian Mafia doesn't in any way, represent what that organization actually is. And what that organization is, I think as he puts it, it's like if you want to compare if you want to compare the Italian mafia to a family-run business, then the Russian mafia is a fast food franchise. That's pretty much how it is. It's franchised out. It's very loose. There's a kind of semi-corporate, semi-military element to the hierarchy, but for the most part, it's not even comparable to the Italian mafia. So I will just post. Let's see. Some of you may have seen this picture of Vera in NaNoWriMo. Vera is a bit of an unusual case. She's not all that she seems. So there's that. I just posted that picture of Vera on the events page. There we go. I'm just having a look back through the comments. If anyone has any questions, by the way, I'd be happy to answer them. I do know some translations of these tattoos, but not all of them. My Russian is more academic than it is practical for the most part. Like, I can read and understand. I can listen to like a documentary and I can understand a fair bit of what's being said, but I can't actually speak the language very well. So let me see. Oh wow, it's only 25 minutes in. So yeah, in addition to this kind of work, I also do nonfiction. So I'm an editor by trade. I come from a magazine editing background, and essentially I do editing and nonfiction as well. I have a book out called Fix Your Damn Book, which is literally a self-editing guide for authors. And I'll start posting up links to my books on the events page as well, because I'm sure some people would like to see that one. Fix Your Damn Book. Give me. There it is. Say I came from an editing background, published a book on self-editing for authors of interest as well. Pretty much on from this point, I think I'm just going to art spam because I'm getting so much art for this series now, which I think is great. Canth, my wife, and I are also working on like a physical, like a traditionally painted, so actual like real paint as opposed to digital paint. I'm primarily a digital artist, and she primarily works in traditional media. But we're working on a single book for our Paracosm, which it basically details all of the monsters and like the evil creatures that exist in this Paracosm. And I have some photos of that already. That book is going to be a bit of a showpiece. So when we eventually do conventions and we sort of take the series on tour, we're going to have this like one and only traditionally painted kind of like grimoire, like a magical text, kind of like your Necronomicon, but there's only going to be one of them because we're only doing one copy. And that book is coming along really well. Canth is also going to be doing the interior illustrations for the hardcovers that we're putting out later this year and early next year, which is going to be a lot of fun. So at this point, I'm just going to art spam because everybody likes pretty pictures. And I'll post a picture of the work we've been doing on this because parts of it are coming along pretty amazingly. And some of them, like these, the Phytonus Contagium is what it's called. And the Morphord are like the primary bad guys of the series. You kind of have to read the books to really get a sense of exactly what they are. But I guess the closest thing would be like, you can imagine like giant viruses that are also Cthulhian monsters, like from the deep black, very unpleasant, mind breaking, existential horror type creatures. Yeah, I'll just create that Photonus Contagium. And I'm going to be doing a second book myself, which is the Phytonus Ars Phytometrica. Sorry, Ars Phytometrica is going to be another single book, traditionally painted, traditionally inked, that will be essentially like a spell book that details like all of the magic and how the magic in this particular universe works. me and my wife. Oh. Together. And when I post these pictures, have a particular look at the first page with the monster crawling down the side of the page. The detail in that thing is just astounding. My wife is a very talented painter. Yeah, it's the one with all the tentacles. You'll be able to pick it out, I'm sure. Wow, so art, such nice. Oh, Liz, you're adorable. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So you've been putting. I'm just checking back to make sure that no one has left questions that I've gone unanswered. All right, no question. All right, so yeah, I don't really know what else to say about the tattoos. I guess I can talk about them in the context of how I've written them into the books, and why I don't actually fetishize them in the books. Yet, at least. Partly because it is a huge, massive stereotype that every Russian mobster is covered in tattoos. Um, there is this really huge, like, cultural generation gap between the guys who were in the Gulag and who were in prisons in the Soviet Union, and the guys who were born in the US or who were born like in the 1990s, late 80s, around the time that the Soviet Union collapsed, because the old guys essentially they had to labor under these really horrific political conditions, really horrific social conditions, and they went to the gulag and they used these tattoos as a way to establish society within chaos. They sorry, Liz, you are adorable. So they use these tattoos to establish a culture and a society within this microcosm, and the tattoos could be they could indicate that you were a high-ranking person. They could also indicate that you were an untouchable, and particularly gay men, certain kinds of like drug addicts, rapists, pedophiles. They tended to be marked as untouchable, essentially, and they would have special tattoos, and they use special anything involving the suit of hearts generally indicated that someone was untouchable or like right at the bottom of the pile. And so the tattoos for them were this really important, like really big deal. And for the younger guys, tattoos became less sort of needed, and they became kind of trendy. And there was this weird, like, sort of transitional period where a lot of criminals stopped getting tattoos, and these days what you see are like these young, like, teenage thug type guys getting these really like intricate sort of prison tattoos, which don't really mean anything. They don't convey the same amount of rank and the same respect that the old guys had. And so there's a lot of conflict between generations of old criminals and new criminals, and to the point where in the Russian mafia, a lot of the younger guys are really treated as expendable and not taken seriously. Because if a kid shows up and he's like 25 and he's got 2 stars and he's got knives and he's got skulls all over him and stuff, people are like, oh yeah, right, sure, you're a captain, sure, you've killed 5 people, sure, you've served 6 terms, whatever. They don't they don't take him seriously. And that's a big part of why Alexei never got tattoos, because he was born in the US and raised in New York, and he is in that kind of weird first generation, second generation immigrant kind of zone, which is always an area that has fascinated me as a writer. I grew up partly with immigrant families. I had a very diverse upbringing and lived with Chinese and Indian families. And I also attended school in a really culturally diverse part of Australia in Melbourne. I went to school in Springvale, which is a suburb of Melbourne that's basically a kind of little Vietnam. There's a very high Vietnamese and Chinese population that lives there, something upwards of like 70% when I was last there. And a full 80% of my school body were born either to immigrant parents or were born outside of Australia. So you're talking about some pretty diverse stuff. And so because I watched that with so many of my friends, like the conflicts and adjustments they had to make as children of immigrants, that's always fascinated me from an artistic perspective. And so a big part of choosing Alexei and Vasily, who is Alexei's best friend, a big part of choosing them as characters was looking at the conflict between how are these young guys who are born into this lifestyle, how are they going to cope being effectively American and being heavily Americanized, born outside of the USSR, having to work for and work with a bunch of people who have come from this kind of horrific, oppressive communist background. And when I say that, I don't necessarily diss communism as a whole, but USSR communism was pretty screwed up. So they came. Someone like Nikolai, who was another major character in the books, he was in the Gulag. He got out of his sentence by joining the army, which was a common option. They have conscription in Russia, and and so a lot of times people would get out of their prison sentences by joining the military. And if they joined the military in that fashion, they were generally pretty unmotivated, and they got up to a lot of funny, unpleasant stuff, which up to and including drinking antifreeze to pass time. And I'm not joking about that. I actually read a report from the Soviet-Afghan War, which was in the 80s. Not many people my age or younger actually know that there was a war between Afghanistan and the USSR. But there was, and for quite some time, Afghanistan was occupied by the USSR. And so Nikolai served in there, and I read this report about how the soldiers were sabotaging their own tanks and their own armored vehicles by draining the antifreeze out of it so that they could brew hooch with it and drink it. And it was a big problem, one of many big problems that they had. The other problem being opium, and there wasn't any drug trade in the USSR because it was so closed off. Like there was the Iron Curtain, and there was basically all of this. They had no external trade for quite a long time, and because of that, drugs weren't a big deal in Russia for a really long time. And then the Afghan War happened, and suddenly it was full of drugs. And now Russia is one of the worst places for drug addiction and drug abuse, and for AIDS as well. It's got the highest rate of AIDS and hepatitis and other communicable diseases like that because of this, influx of first heroin and opium, and then like really horrible stuff like crocodile, and now fentanyl. Which I don't know if you've ever heard of fentanyl, but oh my god, fentanyl is horrific. It's like super Vicodin. It's like this super opiate, and it's dangerous enough that security guards and police in certain countries are now having to carry like anti-narcotic medication in case they touch it. Not just take it, in case they touch it. If they touch it or they breathe it in, like if it's powdered or liquefied, like if someone's like crushed it up and boiled it for injection, you can OD on it just from smelling it. It's really horrific stuff, and that kind of stuff is now rampant all over Russia, all over China now as well. China is now producing a lot of fentanyl, which is really bad. And so yeah, like that huge conflict between someone who has served in that kind of military environment versus someone who's grown up in a little cushy apartment in Brooklyn. And the contrast, say, between someone who values prison time, who thinks that you're not a real man, you're not a real criminal until you've served in prison, versus someone who has every social and economic incentive to stay outside of prison, which is what Alexei and Vasily do have. They don't. Going to prison in America is not useful for someone in their position, and so they don't fetishize going to prison. They didn't want to go to prison. Alexei, in particular, who was a hitman, has no desire to go to prison because he knows he's never going to get out if he goes to jail. And so, there is this, that is a really huge theme. And that's very much the theme in Burn Artist, actually, the first prequel that I wrote. Now, just so you know, I'm giving Burn Artist away for free. This is a book that I wrote intentionally to provide people without charge so that they could kind of meet the universe and get involved in the story and learn about the characters and kind of get a sense of like how rough, I guess, this culture can be sometimes. And not just rough in like a I guess in a criminal way, but rough emotionally and socially. Someone like Alexei is never going to have a normal social existence. He can't. Like, there's no way he's just going to be able to work a job or stop what he's doing, and he can't. His view of morality and his ethics are really screwy. I do not endorse anything I write, by the way. If you read my work and you see people being racist, or you see people being sexist, or you see people killing other people, don't think that I in any way endorse this, because I really don't. I'm going to post a link to the InstaFreebie site where you can get Burn Artist. I can, if you want to pay for Burn Artist, and some people do, like I know some people don't like getting free books, or they don't want to sign up to a mailing list or whatever. I'll post the link on it to Amazon as well. It's only $3 if you want to buy it, but you can get it for free. So here's the link. Burn Artist. And Burn Artist is its own complete story, by the way. There is a full story. There's 2 storylines within 147 pages, so it's pretty fast. It's pretty dense. My work tends to err on the side of being a thriller. It's very uncommon that my books stretch more than like 2 weeks of internal time. So Bloodhound, I think, happens everything in Bloodhound happens within the space of a week. Everything in Stained Glass, there's a time skip where there's about a month of time skip, but all the major events of the book happen within, I think, a week and a half. So they're really rapid fire, and Burn Artist is pretty much the same way. Burn Artist, the prequel to Bloodhound, which you can get for free right here. Apparently I have a post pending approval. I don't know what that means. Oh, there we go. I see. Okay, so there is that. And I'll post a pay link as well. Just like I said, I've had some friends who are like, no, I don't want to get your book for free. You have to let me pay you for it. And I'm like, well, all right. If you really want to. Where are you? How much longer? We've got 20 minutes. And yeah, actually, a lot of people have said that they don't usually like Mafia stories, but they have found Bloodhound and the other books in the series to be quite accessible. And I think part of that is because Alexei isn't just a Russian mobster; he's also a mage. He is a hit mage, basically. He's a wizard that kills for hire. And I've actually got my copy of Stained Glass and Bloodhound here. And yes, I do illustrate my own covers. The Bloodhound was a photo manipulation. Stained Glass, Burn Artist, and the third book in the series, which I'm currently writing, are all hand painted by me. So those are all my original illustrations. As a mage, Alexei is always going to be something other compared to a lot of his friends. And he's always constantly aware that he's not the same as other people that he associates with, in that he is what in Russian would be called a Volk. A Volk is basically like a wizard or a magus. There's a lot of words in Russian for wizard. They have like multiple terms to describe wizards because magic was always a pretty big part of their mythology. So they have Koldun is one of the most common ones. Koldun is not a very flattering word. It kind of is like, evil sorcerer or witch. Volk is a fairly respectful term for a learned magus. It kind of implies someone who has done the study, who knows, alchemy, who knows how to heal, who knows how to, do a bunch of different kinds of magic. And there were also different types of sorcerers. There was the religious, monastic wizard, which were called starets. Starets, a good example, probably the preeminent example of a starets was Rasputin. Rasputin was a starets, so he was a monk that was also, effectively a witch or a practitioner of magic. So Alexei is a Volk. He's a learned magus, and because of that, he has a degree of insight and a degree of self-awareness that most people in that kind of lifestyle lack. And he's always kind of, he has this very strong sense of criminal ethics, but they're not necessarily in line with like normal people ethics, which is something that he runs full tilt into book 3, where he goes to prison. He goes to wizard prison, which is a lot less funny than Azkaban. He goes to wizard prison, and I just actually wrote a scene where he throws sulfuric acid on another guy's dick, which I think was, I wanted to avoid that stereotypical like fighting someone in the bathroom scene, but you kind of also have to hit the tropes as well. So there's a scene where he's cleaning, and this guy tries to beat up on him, and he basically just throws drain cleaner on him, which is not very nice. It doesn't do your skin or flesh any good. And the funny thing about using drain cleaner as a weapon, like, don't take this as any kind of like condoning that you should ever do this, but if you happen to ever get drain cleaner on your skin, if you're going to wash it off, make sure you use a lot of water, like a lot of water, not just like splashing. Like, make sure you jump in a bath or something, because if you add water to sulfuric acid and it's not enough, it will actually start boiling on your skin, and that's really unpleasant. Which is what this guy discovers when he tries to wash it off on his dick. Yeah, you can see where that's going to end up for this guy. I have a work in progress of the cover for that book as well, which has proved to be one of my most popular images. Alexei starts getting tattoos in book 3 because he is in prison and he does things that he feels are sufficient for him to earn getting ink. So I'll just show you this. And one of the tattoos he takes is an alchemical tattoo, and it ties into the sulfuric acid thing. In alchemy, in like magical sort of occult alchemy, the symbol for vitriol is the symbol for sulfur, because sulfuric acid or vitriol was used as a kind of agent to dissolve things, and that's where we get that term vitriol from. Like when you say someone is being vitriolic, they're being angry, they're trying to dissolve an argument, or they're trying to put holes in something, and they're angry. That's where it comes from. It comes from sulfuric acid, and so he gets the symbol, the alchemical symbol of vitriol tattooed on his back, so that everyone remembers what he did, because it's wizard prison, so everybody's going to know what it means. Hang on. Gold cell 3 in the 30s. And people like this one because Alexei looks kind of sexy in it, which I haven't really done in previous covers. Like, I've sort of, I don't know, like I know you're supposed to write to trope to a large extent, but I've always enjoyed subverting tropes, and part of what I did with him was to subvert that whole sexy mobster thing for a long time. He's short, he's 5'5", he's tiny. He's also a virgin, a prudish virgin. He has to kind of overcome a lot of that when he's in prison, because you don't really get to be prudish when you're in jail with people, and you have to share like an open cell block of 24 toilets. That you stop being prudish pretty quickly. I've only got about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to open up to questions that anyone has, or things that they would like to know about, if there's anything that interests people. Yeah, he is tiny. He's like tiny. He's like a bulldog. He's like this tiny little bulldog man. He's like muscular and broad-shouldered, but he's like this big. he's little, and he's also really hardcore because he grew up boxing. His father was a former wrestling champion in Ukraine. So he grew up boxing and wrestling, and he grew up studying Krav Maga, because it's a really good martial art, and also he's Jewish by birth, and so he got into the Israeli style martial arts as well. So he does Krav, he does boxing, and he does wrestling, and he's tiny and he's strong. So when these 3 guys jump him in prison, they really don't know what they're getting themselves into, which he is fairly adamant about afterwards. He's like cussing them out and screaming at them, and I managed to avoid ripping off Rorschach. I don't know if you've ever seen The Watchmen movie. One of the best movies ever. Oh my god! And the graphic novel series. Oh my god! Everything Alan Moore. I love Alan Moore's work, and I'm really inspired by him. But in the Watchmen movie, there's this scene where Rorschach is in prison, and he grabs this thing of burning oil, and he throws this like he breaks the glass in the canteen, and he grabs the fryer, and he basically like heaves this thing of boiling oil onto a guy that's trying to stab him. And then he's like, that whole I'm not locked up in here with you're all locked up in here with me. I think that's one of the best like anti-hero quotes I've ever seen in a film. I was like, oh my god, it was so amazing. Yeah, anyway, I managed to avoid ripping that off with this scene, which was very very difficult, because I really wanted to. There's definitely some of Rorschach in Alexei. Oh, hang on. Can we get what online? Can you get the books online? Yeah, I'm going to post a link to all of the books. Hang on. Where are we? So all my books. All my books can be found there. Just posted in the chat. And if you're interested in reading them, Bloodhound, like Burn Artist is free if you get it on Insta Freebie. Bloodhound is only 99 cents right now. I reduced the price temporarily just for this event, actually, so that people would find it a bit more accessible. Because I'm aware that because it's a somewhat new genre. I mean, I guess the urban fantasy, like private investigator slash anti-hero investigator thing, isn't new. It does definitely fall into the occult detective genre, but because there's some new elements to it, I've been trying to reduce, I guess, the barriers to reading, because it has proved to be popular, and when people actually read it, they generally seem to like it. I have yet to actually get a 1-star review, which I'm beginning to get a bit concerned about. So if you read it and you hate it, please review it. Like, just go on there and blast it. Like, go to Amazon and just be like, yes, this is horrible and there's too much boy kissing. I don't know what you want to say. You go and rant about it because oh, hang on, there's a question. Yeah, just go rant about it because I need a bad review. There hasn't been one, which is kind of, yeah, well, it makes my reviews look fake. Well, you need one, Ronnie. Okay, but to answer Michelle's question, I get all my research from a bunch of different sources. I read FBI bulletins. That's a big part of my research, which is why I know about the fentanyl thing. I used to do security work, so I used to be a bouncer. Yes, Ronnie, you need it. I used to be a bouncer, and as a consequence, I stayed on top of a lot of different criminal issues in Australia and also in the US. I've read quite a few books on the subject. There's a couple of famous books by researchers on the Russian mafia, which only came into the public eye in the 90s. And I don't know if you read Bloodhound and you read the first chapter of Bloodhound expressly references the murder that brought public attention to the Russian mafia, which was a guy who was murdered in his apartment by an unknown assailant. He was a jeweler. He worked in he was a Jewish man who worked in the jeweling industry, and he was killed and left in his apartment. And a case of money was left on the bed with the case open and all the money still inside the case as a message to the FBI, because this guy was a snitch on the FBI payroll. So they actually they left all of the money he'd gotten for doing this, for talking about the organized crime that was going on in Brighton Beach and in LA, Miami, and particularly in New York, Brighton Beach and the Lower East Side, the Ukrainian Village in New York. This guy was one of the first guys to open up about that, and he got killed. And that was a real event. So the incident that happens in Bloodhound is a fictionalization of that event, and the killer was never caught. They don't know who ever did it. In fact, very few Russian hitmen in America have been caught, because generally they come from a military background. If they haven't come from a military background, they've come from a law enforcement or a special forces background, from KGB training, basically, because when the USSR broke up, all of those people were fired. They had nowhere to go, so they became criminals. And Alexei has been trained by these people unofficially over the course of his life. So, he's pretty good at what he does and has no compunction about doing what he does. But anyway, so that's pretty much my hour up. FBI books, internet as well. Also, I called the Jewish Historical Society, and I learned a lot about Jewish crime and immigration from them. That was quite a while back. But other than that, yeah, pretty much just here and there and everywhere. Police reports, news articles, all kinds of stuff. I have a big collection of information, and plus this. But I have like books on the shelf and a whole bunch of things. I try and do my research when it comes to this stuff, rather than just kind of rely on the old tired mafia tropes of your coughing, wheezing Don, and everybody grunting at each other, and I don't know. Hang on, where are we? No, that's not what I wanted to do. Yeah, if anyone has any last questions, I'm going to wrap up. just in just a sec. So I will. There we go. Well, that's all right, Rose. Thanks for listening to me blather on. I do tend to blather a bit, and I'm really tired today. I'm actually surprised that I can even talk. I've had very little sleep for the last 2 days. Yeah, people seem to really like that cover for book 3. I'm kind of happy about that because yeah, I finally capitulated and I'm like, all right, it's time for him to not be a virgin anymore. He's gonna become more sexy. All right, I get it. We need sexy Russian mafia guy. All right, but I think I'm about to hand over. So just before I go, a huge thank you to Theo for organising this, and also for Metamorph Publishing for running the awards. I'm not going to say anything about it because I was asked not to, but yeah, it's been a pleasure as always. And Liz and Ronnie, I believe, have already been. You should read their books if you haven't already. Their books are really good. And they also write urban fantasy. They also write on the darker edge of urban fantasy. I don't think they quite go into the same level of horror that Bloodhound and Stained Glass do. I mean, if you don't like dark themes, you shouldn't read my books. Basically, the first book is probably the lightest of them. Like Bloodhound is probably the lightest of them, and that one involves some pretty serious like torture and doom and gloom. Book 2 is all about human trafficking, specifically the trafficking of children for organs. So yeah, if you're not really into that kind of stuff, you might not want to read my books. But yeah, like Ronnie writes really fast paced, really fun urban fantasy. Liz is, I believe, writing a Weird West urban fantasy that is also, it has a female protagonist and is also quite, dark and, intense, which is really good. And other than that, that's pretty much it. So I'm gonna head off. Thanks for coming. Shock horror, yeah. Well, wait until you read the sulfuric acid scene, because I mean that's pretty full on. He melts a guy's dick off, for God's sake. You know? All right, well, I'm gonna head off. Thanks for coming, and I will surely broadcast in the future as well.